Welcome back to MenuDocs YouTube channel. This is Doug with Intro to JavaScript episode 3. Last episode we covered variables and basic data types, and in this episode we're going to be covering Intro to Logic. So what is logic? Logic is what allows us in programming to make decisions based on an input. Now this input can be data. For the most part it will be data, and this we can use to sort of determine what we want to happen next in our code. So we can say, just using plain English, if a variable has a certain piece of data, then do something. This is a really important concept to understand with JavaScript because it drives what we do from here on out. So let's say, again, in plain English, and these two slashes up here just means a comment. This means that anything after those on that line won't be executed. You can also have comments in this format, so this can be a multi-line comment. So if you see here, that will also not be executed because it's within a multi-line comment. Just a quick little tip there in case you weren't sure what I was doing. So we can say if a variable, let's name it x, I'll do a lowercase x. If a variable x is equal to a string that says hello, then output that to the console. What we can do is we can translate that into code using what's called an if statement or a conditional. So we can we need to declare our variable first. So we'll do let x equals, and we'll make this a string called hello. So we now know that we're checking for the value hello. Now we know that we've assigned it, so let's go ahead and write our conditional. If x, and then we're going to use a non-strict comparison. I'll get to that here in a moment. So if x equals hello is equal to hello, a string of hello, then execute what's in these curly braces here. And it says up here, we want to output that to the console. So we're going to go ahead and do a console log, which we experienced in our previous two episodes, and we can do x there. So if we save this code and run it, we can see that hello gets outputted to the console. If I were to change hello to goodbye, save it, and then run it again, we would see that nothing gets outputted to the console because our code is checking the value of x. I said I would get to this in a minute here. So in JavaScript, we have different data types. So we can see that we experienced this in our last episode when we worked with strings casting to numbers or vice versa. So if we set this to the number 1 in a string, so because it's between these two quotes it's a string, and we set this equal to 1, we can get rid of these comments now because we've introduced the concept now. So if let x is equal to 1 in a string. Now we're checking if x is equal to 1, but we're not checking the data type. That's what this non-strict comparison is. So this non-strict comparison is checking if the value is equal to 1, but not the data types match. So if x is equal to 1, non-strict, then output. So let's go ahead and save this and run it. And we see we get 1 in the console here as a string. So now let's add a third equal sign here, and this is what's called a strict comparison in JavaScript. Now what this does is it checks for the value, but also the data type. So you see here we have a string and a number. Those are not the same data type, even though they're the same character. So let's go ahead and run the code here, and you'll see that nothing gets outputted to the console here because this is a strict comparison. If we go back to a non-strict comparison and run the code again, we'll see it gets outputted to the console. So this is a really important concept to understand, the conditional here. So now we can do, what do we do if this doesn't equal, if this doesn't equate to true? Because in the end, this is all this is doing, is we're getting a Boolean value out of this. And we explored last episode that Booleans are true or false in value. This if statement, all it cares about is if the statement inside the parenthesis equates to true, then it will execute the code inside the curly braces. If it doesn't, it will completely ignore everything inside the curly braces. So what do we do if x does not equal 1? So let's say we go back to our strict operator. So we can go ahead and use what's called an else statement. Now an else statement always has to follow an if, and this is just saying if this equates to false, now do this. So everything inside these curly braces that follows the else here will execute. So now we see that x is a string equal to 1, the character 1. Now we're checking to see if x is equal to the number 1, which is not, because we know those are not the same data type. We'll go ahead and console log, not console error, console log, the data types don't match. We'll save, and we'll run this, and we'll see the data types don't match. So it checked to see if it was equal to 1. It saw that this equated to false because it's not the same data type, and it comes down here and runs anything that's in this else statement. Now let's think and say, now I want to check if x is equal to 1 and then do this. But if x isn't equal to 1, the number version of 1, but it is still 1, we want to do something else. And then if neither of those are true, we'll go ahead and log out. We'll say none of the conditions were true. We'll say this is now strict comparison was true. And then now what we can use is called an else if. So we'll go ahead and create some space here because we're going to do else if, and now we're going to run this code here. I like to format my code to where my else and my else ifs are on the same line as the closing curly brace. If that's a completely stylistic choice, this is just as valid, but I like, for ease of reading, for it to be like that, so I know exactly what that else if is referring to. So now you see here else, just like the same keyword down here, this is only going to run if this is false. So it's going to go, oh, okay, this comparison is false here. What's the next thing in the chain? It's going to see else if. So now this is another conditional that only runs if the initial conditional, or the one that directly precedes it, is false. So we're going to say else if x is loose comparison, or a non-strict comparison, x is equal to 1, console.log, non-strict comparison was true. Let's see what happens if we run this code. Excellent. So it says non-strict comparison was true. That's because it checked this first one here, and it's like, nope, that's false because it's not a number. And then it comes down here and it goes, okay, I'm just checking for the value. And yeah, this string of 1, if it can be cast to the same as this executes inside of here, and because this is true, we can ignore the else completely. So it goes, hey, is this true? No? Okay, go ahead and check if this is true. Is this true? Yep, okay, execute this. Now, let's say if we can change this to something completely different. So it's going to go ahead and check, hey, is this equal to the number 1? JavaScript is going to come back and say, nope, better luck next time. So we're going to go ahead and check and say, hey, is it equal to the character 1? We don't really care if it's a number, if it's a string, but if it's equal to the character 1, go ahead and run this code. JavaScript is going to come back and say, nope, try again. And then we're going to go down here to this else statement. It's like, okay, we give up. We're just going to run this code down here at the bottom. Let's go ahead and make sure that's true. Excellent. None of the conditions were true. That's because we have this is now being a string of the word blue, and that does not match to either the numerical representation of 1, or it can't be cast to a string version of the number 1. So if, else if, and else are very powerful for executing code that you want to run based off a certain condition. That's why they're called conditionals. So let's think of this in a real world scenario. So let's say x is the result of something, and you want to see if something is true. So we'll go ahead and set x to be true. So this is now a Boolean value of true. And now we know that if is only checking to see if the Boolean value is true or not. So if we just do if x, then we console log out, x was true. And then because it's a Boolean value, it can only have 2 states, either true or false. So we'll go ahead and do an else statement down here because there's only 2 possible options, console.log, x was false. Now let's go ahead and run this. We see x was true because this was a Boolean value, and all if cares about is if this is a Boolean. This is powerful in and of itself because now we get into Boolean manipulation and logical operators. So where can we go from here? Now we can get into complex logic, where we're checking more than one thing at a time, possibly. So let's say, for example, we wanted to check if x was true, and then if x was false, if something else is true. In English, we would say if x is true, or this other condition. So let's go ahead and declare another variable, and we'll just set it to yellow. That's fine. So we can go down here and say if x, but now how do we determine if x or something else? And that's where we get into our logical operators. These logical operators allow us to do complex logic, not just a simple if x. So you have a couple different logical operators here. The main ones you're going to want to know are or and. Those are the two biggest. And then there's a third one here called not. So or is just like it says, just like it sounds. If x or y are true, the result is true. And is if x and y are true, the result is true. Maybe I should change, let's get rid of these values here for a second so we're not confused over what x and y are. And then for the last one here, if x is not true, the result is true. And just think of x as representing a comparison. So it could be the equals 1 that we looked at earlier. So let's look at a couple test cases here. So let's say x equals true, y equals false. This will result in true because x is true. Doesn't matter what y is because x is true. So now if we go down here and look at x equals false, y equals true, the result is also true because even though x is false, y is true, and we only care if one of them is true. Now if we go down here and say x equals false, y equals false, the result, it will be false because both of them are false, neither one of them is true. And this is where we get into something called Boolean Matrixes. And Boolean Matrixes are a good way of demonstrating the properties or and. There's others like x or, and you don't really have to know about those for right now. So and, so if we say x equals true, y equals true, and I forgot one up here. We'll do the same one here. X equals true, y equals true. The answer will be true because one of them is true. It doesn't matter about the other. So if we go down here, if both x and y are true, then the result will be true because both of them are true. Now if we go down here and say x equals false, y equals true, the result will be false because x is false and both of them have to be true for the result to be true. And this is true if we reverse the roles, x equals true, y equals false, the result will be false, again, because both of them have to be true. And same thing if they're both false. And y equals false, the result will be false, because they're both false and both of them are not true. And the not operator exactly reverses logic. So let's say if x is, we'll follow the format here, x equals false, the result will be true. And x equals true, the result will be false. It exactly reverses the Boolean value. So now that we have this in mind, I'm gonna go ahead and give myself some more space down here. We're gonna put this into practice with actual code. So we'll go ahead and let value 1 equal hello, and let value 2 equal world. We'll even capitalize the world part. So we can go ahead and go down here. If value 1 is equal to, we'll do a non-strict comparison because for right now, for this purpose, it doesn't matter. So if value 1 equals hello, console log value 1. So this is great. So now if we run this code, we'll see hello, because hello is equal to hello, or value 1 is equal to hello. But now we want to say and, so if value 1 equals hello and value 2 equals world, then console log something. We'll get to that here in a moment. So the symbol, I should probably go up here and write out the symbols. The symbol for and is a double ampersand. The symbol for or is double vertical lines. I'm not sure off the top of my head whether those are called. And then for not, it's just an exclamation point. So think of this as or, and not. And you'll get used to seeing those symbols because you're going to use them a fair amount in your code. So we're going to say if value 1 equals hello and value 2 equals world, then, make sure we're using a comparison operator, not an assignment operator, then console log value 1 plus a space plus value 2. And this is going back to the string manipulation that we, the basic string manipulation concatenation that we explored in episode 2. So if we run this code now, so save it and run it, we'll see hello world outputs to our terminal.
Today's video is proudly powered by our partner, Oxide Hosting. Get your products hosted by them with their cheap, reliable services. So what are you waiting for? Check them out in the description below.
So now we see that value 1 equals hello and value 2 equals world. We'll output it. Now what happens if we want to, I'm just going to comment this out real quick. Let's say what happens if we only care if one of those are true. We can change this to our double vertical lines, and now this is an or statement. So if value 1 equals hello or value 2 equals world, we'll go ahead and execute the code. We run it here again. We see hello world outputs because both of those are true. Now if we were to say, let's say the word blue. So if value 1 equals hello or value 2 equals blue, we obviously know that value 2 is not blue because it's this world string up here. But we're checking to see if it is equal to blue. So we'll go ahead and run this code. And if you see here, hello world outputs yet again, because value 1 is equal to hello, and we only care if one of them is equal. JavaScript works left to right in terms of comparisons and complex logic. So this is evaluated, and if this is true, JavaScript doesn't even check this. JavaScript has no idea that we even asked if value 2 is equal to blue, because it's like, oh, value 1 is equal to hello. It doesn't matter what this is because this is already true. So we're just going to run this anyway. So let's say value 2f, because this variable does not exist. This would throw an error normally if we try to check a value that doesn't exist. So we're going to go ahead and node index.js. See, it doesn't even care. Let's see not. So let's go ahead and, to make things a little bit simpler, we're going to change this back to a Boolean value, and we can ignore this for right now. We'll go ahead and comment that out. So if value 1 is true, we'll go ahead and change this. Value 1 is true. And we'll run it. And because this is a Boolean value, this only cares if it's a Boolean. Console log value 1 is true is correct. It will log that out. Now, what if we wanted to make sure that this is false? Let's say we wanted to make sure something is not true. Not true. Then we go ahead and put an exclamation point in front of the value that we want to negate or want to reverse. You can think about it that way. And we'll go ahead and see, we'll say value 1 is false because for this to equate to true, value 1 has to be false because not false is true. Let that one sink in. Think about that for a second. Not false is true. So we're reversing that logic. So value 1 is false. We'll go ahead and run the code here, and nothing's going to output because value 1 is true. If I were to change this to false and run the code again, you'll see value 1 is false. So we've reversed this value here. And you can see, you can do the same thing with comparisons. So let's say we wanted to check if this is not equal to world, let's say. So if value 1 is not equal to world, then we'll log out and see what value 1 is. So when you're writing this out, this is the same type of comparison as this. So it's a non-strict comparison, but we're negating it. So we're saying if value 1 is not loosely equal to world. And you can do the same thing with a strict comparison. Just think of you're changing one of those equal signs to be the not operator. So if value 1 is not strictly equal to the string world, then we'll log out its value. We'll go ahead and run that just to prove that it's true, and there we go. We get the string that is represented by value 1 printed out to the console because it is not equal to world. Now if we were to uncomment value 2 and change this to value 2 and run it, bam, nothing happens because value 2 is equal to world. So this equates to false. So that's a really good introduction to comparisons and basic logical operators. We'll go in much deeper depth in the next few episodes. We're going to look at switch statements and a whole bunch of other stuff. But from now, this has been Doug with MenuDocs. This has been Intro to JavaScript episode 3. Hope you enjoyed and have a nice day.